Hello and welcome back to another episode of Realm of Unknown. Thank you guys for joining me. I apologize for this weird delay. The last episode that came out was kind of spur of the moment, and I just felt like it'd be fun to get out real quick. And then moving became a bit of a process. I can inform you though that I am 100% moved back, and I am now currently out of my apartment in the city. It's a little disappointing. I really do love Philly, and I really hope that I can get back there soon, sooner than later, that is. However, the whole, job search process after graduation is a bit more tedious than I sort of would like. I'm currently doing some freelance work, so it allows me to have a little bit more free time when doing this sort of podcast format. Ironically enough, I was actually supposed to handle another podcast, and I would have been a host on there. I would have been sort of producing it in a way, and that sort of fell through in a weird way. I don't know if I can technically talk about it because I don't know if things will sort of fall through even further. I didn't sign anything, so I'm not, contractually obligated to not say anything. It was just weird, and I'm sure you don't want to know all the details. If I don't know, maybe we'll talk about it in a later date when I actually know 100% that it's done for. But yeah, so aside from that, again, I'm back. I'm moved in. What I've done is, we talked about this, I believe, 2 episodes ago, in which I sort of created a bit of a episode structure. I don't know if most podcasts do this or not. I know several, they'll plan out ahead of time, or they'll record several in one go. I can't really do that a whole lot because of how my schedule kind of is. I can't really sit down and just have a long recording time. I would like to just have a day where I can just go on and record. Unfortunately though, I can't, and so instead I am sort of preemptively planning each episode ahead of time. So, all the topics, all the research, all that. And as mentioned, like I said, 2 episodes ago, before the previous episode in which I had a host, my friend Justin, on, I did mention that the next episode was going to be this one, which is Fort Mifflin. And from here on out, the schedule should be the same. So I already mentioned that the next episode will be on the Dover Demon. So if anyone's into that sort of, cryptozoology, weird mysterious creature type stuff, stay tuned for next episode, which should be up on Tuesday. And from there, I have a set schedule, and I hope you guys are interested on the topics that I have outlined. Most, if not a good portion of them, are sort of regional based to where I am, because I like to give my own opinion. I like to sort of talk about my own experiences in the specific locations. Unfortunately, I can't really do it for Fort Mifflin today. My only real story is the fact that I was going to go on an investigation at Fort Mifflin, and it got rained out. So unfortunately, I couldn't go. I do hope to go someday. It seems like a cool place, and I definitely would like to do an investigation there. But for now, I hope you guys can be satisfied with this little research and ghost stories that I have from this location. So again, like normal formats, we're going to talk a bit about the background, and then I'm going to go in about the ghost stories, and then sort of just give my commentary. So if you guys don't know, or you're not from the region, I actually didn't even know about this place. Ironically enough, my grandmother was the one who told me about it. Fort Mifflin was originally commissioned back in 1771 and once went by the name of the Fort Island Battery or Mud Island Fort. The fort being settled upon Mud Island or the Deepwater Island. It's settled along the Delaware River just below Philadelphia. Obvious reason why I chose this location. I like a lot of Philly-based stories, and this one is up there. It's definitely one of the more prominent and more infamous haunted spots in and around the Philadelphia region. For a bit more context, if you guys have ever been to the Philadelphia International Airport, it's not that far away from there, so it's a little bit southwest of the actual city. So during the American Revolutionary War, the British Army bombarded and captured the fort, being a part of their overall victory and claiming of the city of Philadelphia back in the autumn of 1777. In 1795, however, the fort was renamed in honor of Thomas Mifflin, a contemporary Army officer, a Continental Army officer, and the first post-independent governor of Pennsylvania. The United States Army began to rebuild the fort in 1794, and this continued on and bulked up throughout the 19th century. And then during the Civil War, the fort became a sort of housing area for several prisoners of war. The Army eventually would decommission Fort Mifflin from active duty infantry and artillery come the year 1962. So it's got a pretty long lifespan. Essentially, I believe the British were the ones who originally actually, built the fort while they were occupying the Americas, and or they were occupying the colonies at this time. And it has a very rich history to the region and direct ties, to the founding of the country, a lot of its history, a lot of its turmoil, and a lot of its conflict. So, however, while all this was being decommissioned and stuff, the older portion of the fort was actually returned to the city of Philadelphia. A portion of the fort's grounds is still active, actually, to the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And because of this, it's technically considered and holds the title for the oldest fort in military use within the United States. And a lot of historical preservationists have been restoring the fort and now have made it a national historical landmark. So it's got a long history. It's got a lot of interesting just energy to it, and obviously a lot of people have been in and out of it. Not all of it has been great. Again, it was very much active during the Revolutionary War, and it was active during the Civil War. However, I don't believe anything actually was, active in there. I don't believe they had any battles at Fort Mifflin. I could be wrong. I'm not sure. I didn't do such a deep dive into the Civil War era. I know that a major portion of the conflict and all the death and the negative energy stems from the Revolutionary War, which some of the ghost stories that we're about to talk about will directly tie into that. So bear with me. And I believe there might be one from the Civil War, which I believe, there's one. But there were no battles, from what I can remember, which take place near or on the ground. So keep that in mind. So moving along, again, we got a long history, a lot of time here, and a lot of just trauma and negative energy, and that just sort of built up over time. A lot of paranormal investigators and a lot of people who are into this field believe, stone and iron and all that sort of stuff can kind of trap certain energies. I don't know how I feel about that, but the fort is predominantly made out of that, and it's positioned right near a moving body of water, which is another conduit that a lot of paranormal enthusiasts believe could be attributed to ghost activity or just energy sort of store up. And it's just sort of this perfect little cauldron of all the perfect catalysts and all the perfect reasons as to why there might be spirits just settled upon this prime spot. And that's sort of what Fort Mifflin is, and therefore it becomes one of the most, it's always on one of those top 10 lists or top 50 lists of most haunted places in the United States or the most haunted places on the globe. Fort Mifflin's always on that list somewhere, and especially when you come here to the East Coast or to Pennsylvania, it's always on that list. It's up there with all the penitentiaries we have over here and all the weird hospitals. It's up there. It's up there with the stories and the accounts. I don't know. From what I can understand, it's not so much that it's so severe that it's up there, but I would say that it's probably due to the fact that it's very prevalent because so many people are in and out of that, and I think it's just the sheer number of reports and just weird feelings that people get here is why it's so renowned. And a few paranormal teams have gone there. Some of the stories I will talk about are in direct research from those groups. And I believe Ghost Hunters has investigated here. I don't remember if Ghost Adventures has, or like any of those other more well-known paranormal groups on TV, for anyone who might only really know the paranormal through there. Let me just look it up real quick. I just want to see if they actually did. So Ghost Hunters did investigate Fort Mifflin. It was their 4th season, episode 1. And I just want to see Adventures. I don't think they did. Yeah, so I think Ghost Hunters investigated. I don't think Ghost Adventures did. For anyone who needs context for that. So I'll get onto my own research and we'll continue. So here are some of the reports. So with the ghost stories, the 2nd floor balcony region of the barracks within it, and keep in mind the fort has a lot of separate buildings. So we're going to talk about specific spots rather than it just being a massive, overall building. So the 2nd floor balcony region of the barracks is often visited by the spirit of a lamplighter. This is a man whose job it was to light and maintain the oil lamps pretty much every evening. His figure was often reported to be a pale and extremely translucent form, often just barely visible within the twilight or within the moonlight, and very, very ominous and just sort of like mist-like figure. People also report seeing him carrying a long pole with a dimly flickering light at the end of it, which is more likely than not the pole and wick that is very commonly used when lighting these lamps. This was like a tool back in the day, and it's still used. Lamplighters aren't exactly the most common trait at the moment, but there are a few people that do, more usually in like colonial areas. And they use a long pole to light the lamps that are higher up. So a lot of people see him walking around with that in hand. It's sort of odd, but that's just how his thing is. I guess he loved his job. So aside from him, there are 2 more prominent figures, and I want to talk about probably the creepiest one, and the one that I most remember from like prior research to this location. That is the pretty well cited spectral figure of a faceless man. This spirit is reported to be sighted pretty often, and if not, as a physical apparition, a lot of people have like very brief visions of him within their mind, like he just sort of pops in and stuff like that. So the Faceless Man is supposedly, keep in mind, the ghost of a war criminal who was held within the cells of Fort Mifflin back during the Civil War. Many believe that the criminal in question is actually the name of William Howe, who was locked up and eventually killed a superior officer and, deserting during the war, and that's why he was detained. He was actually, I believe, detained in Fort Mifflin and then brought over to Eastern State while he was being processed and charged and all that sort of stuff. And then he was brought back to Fort Mifflin, in which he was eventually hanged for his crimes. And I believe he was either the only or the last person in which, I'm pretty sure it was the only, in which they charged tickets so that the public could come and watch him die. And I don't know why they did it. I guess they hated him more than the other prisoners they were going to hang at the time, and I don't know, it just made his death even more crazy. And because of this, his spirit appears today to a lot of visitors and staff within the fort. His figure is fairly easy to see. Most people, again, if they see the apparition, it feels as though the man is there. But it may stem, I'm getting ahead of me in my notes. He's very easily able to see. However, except for one feature, that being his face, is either not present at all, or is either obscured by something, or is just covered in shadow. So you can't see his face. He's a very looming figure. It seems odd, why doesn't he have a face? Why is it hidden? But it may actually have some roots to history and to how he died, because back in the day, before hanging, a lot of a lot of deserters supposedly had their heads tied up within a black bag. So, just sort of like a symbol of shame and, disrespect, and then, they're hanged. So I guess no one can like attribute, their name or their image and stuff like that. So, he died in that way, in that form, and, he kept it into death, potentially. Now, again, might be more speculation on the parts of people who are investigating. I don't know. Again, I haven't been there, so I can't, be for certain. So, I don't know. I think it's a nice little snippet. I love when, like, things can kind of be connected together in a lot of ways, and this one, fits, but I haven't seen him, so I don't know 100%. Okay, so then moving on to like the next, I guess, more prominent figure of the fort, besides the Faceless Man, being one of the big wigs. Another thing that the fort is very much attributed to is another spirit by the name of the Screaming Lady. It's another bizarre and sort of spooky creature / character that calls the fort its home. But unlike the other spirits that most people, see or report, she's actually never seen. No one ever sees her figure. No one ever really sees her. However, she's heard a lot. She's often heard wailing and screaming from the old officers' quarters. People supposedly, and again, this is a lot of speculation, people don't really have concrete evidence, but they sort of believe that this may be a woman by the name of Elizabeth Pratt, who back in the 18th century was a woman who lived pretty much right near the fort, and her daughter eventually, got in a relationship with an officer and, lived there. Elizabeth did not approve of this relationship, and, she sort of like disowned her daughter and threw her out of the house, but her daughter died really quickly after, and there's a little bit of debate, at least from the research that I've looked up. Some accounts have her saying that, she died from dysentery. Others say that she died from typhoid fever, which is yellow fever. Those might be the same thing. I don't know. I mean, they might have shared symptoms. There's like a debate on like how she died, but the general story goes that she died from like a sudden ailment. And because of this, because it was so close in proximity to her mother, kicking her out, Elizabeth was just just overwhelmed with grief and guilt over, kicking her daughter out of the house, being like, oh, I caused this, I drove, like all this stuff. And ultimately, Elizabeth would take her own life. Many people reporting that she hung herself. Because of this, in death, she is still mourning and traumatized over her daughter's passing, and she just screams bloody murder at the top of her lungs in the fort. And it is so bad that, get this, the Philadelphia Police Department has actually been called in a few times to investigate these screams. They're so blood-curdlingly loud and traumatic that people who witness and report these things sometimes think that an actual woman is being attacked or killed or something, and they're so freaked out and they don't know where she is, so they call the cops, and the cops have to come investigate. And there's no one there. There's no woman. There's no one they can find, and that's just crazy that the police are actually getting involved with this sort of stuff. However, though, they're unlike the man having some ties with history, there's a bit of debate when it comes to Elizabeth, and ironically enough, it's the fact that people think it may be a different Elizabeth. So okay. A lot of people are pretty much divided between is it this Elizabeth or is it this one, the mother, who was responsible for all this screaming. And on top of all this, there are actually very few accounts, or I guess first-hand accounts, involving the screaming woman. So there's no, again, no one sees her, no one's really within the proximity of her. They'll hear her in the distance, they'll be nearby, or they'll be in the fort and they just hear this guttural scream. So there's no solid accounts of this. Some investigators, get EVPs of a distant scream. But keep in mind too that the quarters, the officers' quarters in which Elizabeth is highly attributed to that area, it's actually positioned pretty close to the edge of where the fort's boundaries are. So people are like, hey, we don't actually technically know, since none of us are actually in the area in which the screams happen, none of us actually know if the screams are happening there on the fort or just off the fort or a little further away. So there's a little bit of debate, but I guess over time, you know, it's become just so infamous and so apparent that like this spot has been attributed to it that the screams just sort of get tied into the whole paranormal reports and history of the fort and just sort of become its own, you know, story. I think it's creepy, but I don't know how confident I am on this one because of how much, you know, disparity there is. I have to be there. I don't know if I would want to be there when a woman starts screaming bloody murder at like 2 a.m. or whatever. But yeah, so for a moment, we're going to take a break. I'm going to read a little quick snippet ad sort of thing. When we get back, I'm going to talk about another, I guess, figure ghost and then a bit more of like specific accounts. I don't know. I mean, I've never mentioned this before. Usually I just sort of throw them in there. I do run ads sometimes. I never tell you guys, so I'm going to just try to now be like, hey, this is when it cuts, because I feel bad just abruptly cutting it. This is the only announcement that will happen for. From now on, it will just be fluid. So yeah. So moving on with the ghost stories with the fort, we have less specific stuff and more overall things, but before we talk about that, there is technically one more spirit that I want to talk about. I mean, there's a few, but this one actually has a name, and this is sort of similar to Elizabeth, so I put him right afterwards, in the fact that no one has actually seen this spirit, and this is mainly centered around the blacksmith shop within the fort. So a lot of people report, you know, clanging of hammers against the anvil, is that sort of sound. It's very often, you know, reported like echoing throughout the fort. And when people go to investigate this location, the room's empty. There's no sound. It goes onwards until you pretty much get into the room. So it's very bizarre. A lot of people are like, what is going on? And so the room is supposedly haunted by a blacksmith back in the day by the name of Jacob, who once more has never been seen physically, but he's pretty much causes quite a stir within his sort of selective space within the fort. So tools that hang on the walls within the shop have often reported being, you know, swinging back and forth, making noise on their own. And a few investigators will leave objects in the room and they'll move on their own after, you know, they left, and, you know, that sort of stuff. Nothing crazy, but definitely more physical activity. And the door to the shop also supposedly is reported to open up on its own. And this may have some context to Jacob, as he very often requested that the door to his, you know, blacksmith, a very hot room, he would want it open, and a lot of the officers would be like, no, you have to keep it shut. So he would try to open it up, they would shut it, open it up, he would shut it, and that just sort of, I guess, continued on through death. And again, though, no one sees any of these activities happening, so it's a little bit debatable, but Jacob seems to continue, like sort of like the lamplighter, he's just continuing his job after death. So aside from that, a lot of the reports are kind of vague coming up, although there's technically one that I kind of want to talk about before I get into that vague stuff. I don't know a whole lot of details on this, and I really only found one or two sources that are attributed to this specific ghost. So within the Powder magazine, which is sort of like a space in which gunpowder would be stored at the time, there are claims of a more friendly ghost. And not to say that the others are not, but, you know, like the Faceless Man is pretty ominous, and a lot of people get really negative feelings with him. And the Screaming Woman clearly, you know, gets people upset. So in this case, they have a very pretty much kind spirit, and this person is believed to, you know, interact with visitors who come to the fort And this spirit is said to be dressed in a same or similar type apparel, to a man who may have served during the Revolutionary War era. So many people actually believe that when they're interacting with him, that he's an employee. They think that, he's dressed up, he's playing a role, and he actually offers details about the fort. He'll answer questions to people who are on tours, he'll make jokes, and he'll just sort of socialize with people. So, they think he's just some normal guy, he's an employee of the fort. And it's gotten to the point in which the fort's visitor office eventually had to state that there was no such employee that matches that description and dresses in that manner. Nor are there any employees that offer that sort of tour service. However, the guests who see him are pretty adamant that this guy actually was there, that they are actually having a conversation. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it's neat that, there's a ghost that, I guess in death, was like, I'm going to be a tour guide. Or he's just a really, chill dude who, he sort of like my grandfather. He just loves talking about history, and he knows a lot about the fort, so he's just like, fine, I'll just talk about it. You guys came to listen, I'll talk. I think it's cool. There's very few reports about this spirit. There are some individual stories from visitors, but I don't take that as credible reports, because again, it's the internet. People can just make things up. I would have to be there. I'd have to know. I'd have to interview some actual people who work on the fort. But we'll see. I'm definitely interested to learn a bit more about this guy. Potentially maybe find out a name if there is any attached to him. But from there on out, most of the reports are either individual things that happen to investigators, or they're just sort of generalized stuff, which most paranormal, locations get. And we've talked about that before with other spots. So the I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I just know I am. The casemates, which are, there's sections of the fort in which artillery and other firearms could be positioned and fired out of. It's this. It's not a complicated spelled word. I'm going to pronounce this one wrong, so bear with me. It pops up a few more times. But these spots within the fort are crazy paranormal hotspots. I know we talked about specific locations like the blacksmith and the balcony areas. But for some reason, most of the more obscure reports are all centered around here. And it's not totally unbelievable, because during, again, the Revolutionary War, in which, there were casualties to this fort, most, if not all, of the enemy fire was directed to these regions of this, establishment. And a lot, or most of the casualties during that time were focused on these specific regions of the fort. So it's not totally unbelievable that, some negative energy or some lingering sort of stuff was left where dozens upon dozens of people died. So people today who visit the area, both, guests and tour guides alike, they report hearing disembodied voices within these regions and locations of the fort, with several investigators capturing EVPs within these locations. People have also spotted, phantom faces and objects within the casemates. And specifically, the casemate, I'm going to pronounce this back and forth wrong, the casemates 5 and 11, they're all numbered. Those two in particular have direct relation to William Howe, the Faceless Man that we talked about earlier. I forget which one it was, but I believe he was held at 11, and most people see him in 5. I could be wrong though. So the casement number 4 and 5 in particular too. Again, we just mentioned that 5 has a huge huge relation to the Faceless Man, but 4 and 5 in particular are linked to more of the, I guess, aggressive and violent reports. Not so much in physical, but more, I guess, active in, how the spirits are handling things. So a lot of people report sightings of, shadowy figures in the doorways. This is where people see a lot of apparitions, a lot of just disembodied figures. There's a lot of disembodied mist moving throughout the room. A lot of photos are captured that sort of have this ominous sort of shape that flows throughout the dark. There are extremely heavy doors to these locations. However, the heavy doors in these rooms in particular have been reported to move open on their own. And this was, after people believed that they were closed. So, and also during certain investigations, people who are there report that while they're sitting within the rooms, doing EVP sessions, doing their investigation, just sort of listening, outside in the hallway, there are a lot of noises. They'll hear shuffling as if someone's moving around. They'll hear footsteps, very heavy boots. In the distance, they'll hear like mumbling, just sort of people like whispering in the dark. And then, which to me is the creepiest, they'll hear very, very, very loud moaning, like just outside the door, as if someone's like right around the wall. And to the credit of these investigators, they all think like this is real. Like the moaning in particular, they say is so loud that someone sitting in the room 4 thought that someone in room 5 was making the moaning, and vice versa. Like it was so loud and so specific and so close to them that they thought an actual person, was hurt or was disoriented, and they had to get up and leave and check, and there was no one there. So that in particular is just a very bizarre thing, and just creepy in general. And then above all, in all the other locations, I guess, sort of a generalized thing throughout the fort. A lot of guests to the location often report a lot of feelings of just feeling unwell while they're visiting the fort, and this is pretty much a very wide array of different ailments. People get, sudden headaches and migraines, which is pretty common with certain paranormal locations. They'll get a lot of dizziness and sort of like unbalance. Again, though, this might be attributed to, like dehydration. I don't know. A lot of people report very sharp pains, either like in their backs, their legs, sort of as like something's pressing on them, or sharper in a lot of reports. And a heaviness, like their body, just weight is like felt upon their body. And just a lot of other odd, just again, weird sudden ailments that no one can really understand why they're just coming about. People, and this is again a broad thing, guests, people who are working there, tour guides, a lot of them report sounds. Sounds are a huge thing in the fort. Like we've mentioned a lot with the specific spirits, sounds are just like a thing. So this ranges anywhere from, disembodied voices, people whispering, people again moaning in the distance, people apparently whining. I don't know what that is, but it may, be attributed to the fact that so many people died, or the fact that people were held prisoner here. Objects are said to move in the distance and make sound, again, sort of similar to the blacksmith place. People have reported things moving, rocks moving about. It sounds as though there's stone on stone, metal on stone, a lot of weird noises. And a lot of people also report heavy footsteps, as though someone's wearing boots or maybe, military uniform, most often on floors that are overhead. So if you're on the ground floor, you'll hear it on the second floor. If you're on the second floor, vice versa, that sort of stuff. But more often than not, pretty much across the board with all these things, people report a sense of just uneasiness. They feel unwelcomed, and I don't know, it's just they have this sense of, not negative, so to speak. A lot of people don't report, being violated or feeling like unwell, like to the sense of like they're feeling as though they're in danger. But people feel uneasy. They feel on edge while at the fort. And this goes pretty much with most specific buildings on the fort, and in some accounts, pretty much across the fort. And I don't know, I mean, it's pretty similar to a lot of paranormal locations. I know some friends of mine, and I've read up on certain, investigations to places, like the penitentiary in Eastern State. I get it. I've been there a few times myself. I don't personally feel unwelcome there, but that's just me. Again, it's very specific, but I can totally understand. Like, old locations sort of have this ominousness to them. They're like, people aren't living there anymore, so it feels a little odd, like, hey, why is it still here? But it's, supposed to have people. I get that. It's again, it's old, it's very colonial, it has that history. If you're going there knowing it's haunted, again, you're going to have that sort of bias to you. Even if it's just subconscious, just like a very slight unattributed noise in the distance, if you are, thinking about it, it's going to make you more on edge. So I don't know. But just to wrap up the stories, because it was a little short, but I think there's a pretty solid amount of history and ghost stories to this location. But to wrap it up, we have one very small last one in which a tour guide to the fort has once reported spotting the spectral figures of a few ghostly children who are accompanied by their dog. So it's sweet. I don't know how prominent this one is. I only found one account of it, but I don't know. I thought it was like a nice little ending to a pretty, I guess, heavy location. Again, the Fort Mifflin has a long history here in America, and especially, during the Revolutionary era, in which most of these stories come from. And I don't know, I just felt like it was a nice little happy note, because I don't know, even though the fact that the kids clearly died, or the dog died, we don't really know. But it's nice to think, you can have a dog in the afterlife. I think that's sweet. I hope that all my pooches throughout my life eventually come back, and I can just have them all, and I can just live with all my dogs for one moment. But yeah, I mean, I had fun researching this. Fort Mifflin was definitely interesting. It was a bit hard trying to find specific stories, but I think overall, the biggest draw to the fort is, again, the history that it has, and when it comes to the ghosts, the more specific ghosts. And again, I need to go back and I need to watch that that Ghost Hunters episode. I try my best to avoid like any and all sort of history with paranormal shows when it comes to my research. I'll definitely acknowledge the fact that they were made. I did when I talked about the Philadelphia Zoo and the Ghost Hunters, and then again, oh wait, I never did the penitentiary. I thought I did, but yeah. So I don't know. I try to keep that out. I know some people talk about it. Some channels, or not channels. Oh, I keep forgetting this isn't. I keep forgetting this isn't a YouTube channel, but other podcasts maybe bring it up. I don't know. I do very much like the fact that a lot of people, especially paranormal podcasts that I'm listening to currently, will attribute Zach Bagan with Zach Bagels or Zach Bagel Bite, and I feel very, I don't know the correct word for this, but way back in like 2015 or whatever, I started my YouTube channel with the same name, and I did a bit where whenever I would mention the Ghost Adventures, and I would ever mention Zach Bacon, I would always pop him up on the screen in like a PNG cutout, and he just has a bagel face. Like just a random bagel I just overlaid on top of his head and just made into a PNG, and he would just be like this random thing that pops up, and I don't know, I was always thought it was like ha ha ha, and then years later people are doing the same thing. So I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be a bit more light with all this, even though, it's a dark thing. I don't know. I just like talking about these subjects, and I like talking about it with you guys, and it's easier to discuss when I'm just sort of free-flowing and reading my notes and just having a fun time. And I hope you guys are enjoying this. Again, I had fun researching Fort Mifflin, and I hope you guys did too. If you have any of your own stories with the base, or I guess the fort, definitely reach out to me. I know a few people, when I was looking this up, comments and stuff, I read that people do have their own stories here. And if you have your own, I would love to hear them. Reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram at Realm of Unknown. I would love to hear them. But if you want to be a bit more personal, you can email me too. It's realmofofunknown@gmail.com. And I'm always interested in hearing personal stories. I don't know if I'll ever do a listeners episode type thing. I know a lot of podcasts do. I think I would have to either be bigger for that, or I'd have to like reevaluate the format I'm currently working with, because again, like I really like giving my own say based off of my own experiences and my own knowledge, I guess, within the fields, and or like I guess my own craft, because I've talked a bit about being a designer and having that digital knowledge with certain accounts. I don't know how that would translate super well to personal stories, because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I don't want to attribute my own say into someone else's truth or someone else's life, and I think I would have to really evaluate that. If you guys do want me to, I can maybe give it a try, but that's much later on down the I can't even speak. It's much later on down the road, and I think for now, if you guys want to reach out to me and have your own stories, definitely do so. But for now, we're gonna keep it to the little format that I currently have. I have a few episodes, I have a lot planned out topic wise. But again, as I mentioned before, the only one that I'm currently allowing you guys to know up front is Tuesday. I don't know what date that would be. 23rd maybe, I think it would be. I don't know. The 30th. What are we talking about, the 23rd? The Dover Demon, which is going to be a fun, interesting thing. I haven't talked a whole lot about, alien type theories or cryptid type stuff aside from, the Dark Watchers. And I'm interested to talk about that. I'm sort of dividing up Tuesdays and Saturdays. And Saturdays are going to be my more... Again, I mentioned this 2 episodes ago, but for anyone who hasn't listened and is somehow still listening this far into this episode, first off, thank you. And second, I'm going to be dividing the Saturday and Tuesday episodes into more heavily researched episodes, being like this for Mifflin, which have more history and more accounts, and are just bigger stories in general that I can do a bit more with and talk a bit more about. And then Tuesday episodes, which are just fun, interesting topics that I want to talk about, but, might not be able to hold up a super long episode like this one, or just even an average episode. Even this, I haven't really done too much rambling, so it's roughly about an hour or so. But Dover Demon might be way shorter, so I don't know, and then we'll see how that goes from there. Again, if you want to reach out to me, you guys can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Realm of Unknown. And you can reach out to me on Gmail at realmofunknown@gmail.com. You guys can check me out pretty much anywhere when it comes to podcasts. And I'm trying to get over onto YouTube a bit more, because I am posting my episodes there. So if you guys prefer to listen over there, and if you are listening there, thank you. But for now, I would really love if you guys could give me some feedback. If you're listening on iTunes or Stitcher, leave a review if you could. On YouTube, leave some comments. Again, I love hearing feedback. I don't care if it's negative. I feel like I went to art school, so I'm pretty used to constructive criticism. I've gotten some rough ones, so don't feel bad. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed listening, and I hope you guys can stay tuned for the next upcoming episode on Tuesday, and then the following week, and the following week, and the following week, because I want to be here more often, and I hope to build up a really nice community with you guys, because you guys are great, and I love that you guys listen to my stuff. So I'm going to head off, because I'm rambling now, but I hope you guys enjoyed, and remember to stay spooky.